John, I am super excited today to bring to us a special guest. You and I had talked about bringing on
Finally got Elon Musk on the phone.
No, not Elon Musk. Not Elon Musk. I think we got somebody even better here, actually. I had mentioned to you that I wanted to bring on a couple of the UA participants from Ultimate Adventure. And as you know, we've been promising our listeners for at least 30 episodes now that we were going to try to do research on the Z71 and that we did research on the Z71. And it's time to tell our listeners about what we did. However,
full page of notes right here.
Yeah, exactly. I see your full blank page there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that this is the perfect episode to bring Mr. Chevy Truck Guy and undisputable, probably the number one Chevy
his actual
truck
name.
Pretty much.
Cool.
The number one Chevy aftermarket truck guy for the off-road industry, at least in my opinion and in many people's, Mr. Stephen Watson of Off-Road Design.
Wait, I thought you said it was Chevy Guy.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Oh.
So, Mr. Stephen Watson of Off-Road Design. I would, you want to talk to him today?
I suppose we can, yeah.
All right, let's do that.
It's time to hit the trail, lock in those hubs, and throw it into low range. Because you are listening to Wheelin' with Keith and Johnny Orange, broadcasting from the Thin Line Off-Road Studio. They're here to talk about 4x4s, trucks, and everything to do with enjoying the great outdoors. Buckle up. Here's your hosts, Keith and Johnny Orange.
All right, Stephen, do we have you on the phone, sir?
Yeah, here I am. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, starting out here, did you get back from UA? Successful? No, trailer issues, nothing. Were you able to get home safe and sound?
No flat tires.
No drama. I kind of coined this phrase after this. I did a Moab trip last weekend and took that same '99 Chevy that we had on the UA trip, and I've started calling it the easy button because we get in the truck and drive where you want to go four-wheeling, and you go four-wheeling and air up the tires and drive home.
I love it.
And, there's tow rigs have like a dozen tires involved, minimum, and, all the bearings, all the stuff, and it's so easy just to get in the truck and drive it where you want to go and wheel it and come home. It's really pretty refreshing doing it that way. And so far, we haven't had to rescue a trail truck from somewhere.
Yeah.
We had to rescue a tow rig. So we've had some trail rigs that drove several thousand miles home that weren't supposed to, but it's worked out well. So yeah, in this case, we woke up in South Dakota and, loaded up in the truck and drove home, and that's really all there was to it.
Did you trailer your Chevy, or did you drive it all the way?
So that truck has been on a trailer twice in its time that we've had it. We the very first Ultimate Adventure that we took that truck on was 2011, and the build went really smooth as far as even all of our UA builds go. There's a lot of bolt-on stuff on the truck. It was reasonably straightforward to get it put together, and we got ready to leave on the trip, and it's like, we've not wheeled it, we've not used it, we didn't trust it, so we went ahead and towed it to, we started in Missouri and ended in Oklahoma. So we towed it to Missouri, had a buddy take it toward near the end point in Oklahoma, and then we towed it home. But as we were driving after the trip, as we were driving the truck back to get the trailer, and load it up, we're sitting there, it was my brother and I, we look at each other, it's like, why are we getting a tow rig? This is totally fine. We should just drive this home. And that was the last time that truck went on a trailer.
Which UA was that?
That was in 2011.
Okay, so has it been on every UA since 2011?
No, it's done. We did 11 and 12, and then the convertible wasn't ready for 14, so we took it on 14, and then we drove it to Alaska last year because, once again, it was kind of the the easy button out of our. We needed that truck. It needed to be simple, reliable, proven, tested, easy to deal with, and we owned the truck. We didn't want to try to build that out of something. We just hit the easy button and took. It's something we try to relate to with normal people is, with the magazines, they're building a new rig every year. And normal guys can't do that. We can't do that. And the last year's trip and even this year's trip were great examples. We needed a rig that we had. We'd built, was tried, tested. We've got 50,000 miles on that vehicle as a built four-wheel drive.
Oh, wow.
And, so we did what normal people are going to do and did a prep job on the truck that we had and used it.
Well, I've seen that truck in person, and, just not blowing smoke up you or anything like that. I think it's probably the coolest classic body style Chevy truck I have ever seen in my entire life. I love that thing to death. As you know, I've seen it all over the place. I've seen it in action. John's never seen it in action except maybe a video or two or a picture here and there.
Probably seen it. If you're on the UA trips, I used to get Peterson's back then, so I probably saw it or read about it, I'm sure.
But for our listeners and for John here, give us a rundown of what you took on UA this year.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, the truck was kind of a bolt-on project for us. It's a 99 2500. It's actually a GMC truck. And it was actually a ski area truck at Snowmass Ski Area up here. And we have a friend that bought a whole batch of trucks at an auction from the ski area. And the neat thing about it is the key fobs, we, of course, being a kind of an institution, they had multiple extra keys. So we got, 4 sets of keys, and they all have these brass rings on them. And it has the truck number, it's 6889, and then it says Trails on it.
Cool.
It's so it was a trail truck from the beginning.
That's cool.
And yeah, that part's pretty neat, but it's a single cab, was a long bed truck, came with the Vortec 454 and an NV 4500, and of course had the full float 14 bolt in it. And we got it with about 60 to 65,000 miles on it. So it was reasonably fresh, and you could tell it had been a trail truck because it had some sort of lumber rack on the bed, and the bed was beat. And, you could tell it had lots of time in it for such a low number of miles. But, it's what we were looking for because we were taking the bed off and messing with everything. So we bolted our solid axle swap kit in it with a set of our custom front springs. At the time, we didn't have our Magnum going. We put our 203 doubler kit in it. And that was kind of the extent of the major replacement parts. It kept the factory engine, factory transmission. Like I say, put in our doubler kit. Ended up using a 99 Ford Dana 60, or not 99, a 79 Ford Dana 60 in the front. The left-hand high pinion. It's got the narrower spring perches, so it works out real well for tire clearance. And then, like you say, our custom springs and a set of 2.5-inch shocks, King shocks on it. And then for the rear, we shortened the frame up to short bed dimensions. So we took, I think it was about 14 inches out of the frame. And the rear suspension is like stock. Spring hangers are still riveted onto the frame. The frame was shortened ahead of that. So the rear end thinks it's a 2500. It's just closer to the front. And we've got a set of our custom springs and 2.5-inch shocks on that with some traction bars, and then air lockers in both ends, so everything's controllable. And that's one of the secrets is making a full-size truck work off-road and be able to keep up with smaller rigs. One of the tricks is that you have to do all the tricks. So, with this truck, we've got good low gearing. It used to be that a fuel injected engine was important, and it's still a thing. It's got reasonable power, runs good, always runs. With I bring up the air locker in the back, these things turn really well if you can unlock the rear end. So that's something that seems like our trucks always turn extra sharp, Well, we've learned through some of the comp stuff that we've done and race and hammer stuff that we've done that if the front end is locked up and the rear end is open, which is kind of opposite of the way a lot of people play it, the trucks turn really well. And, we've got a lock off, brake block switch we actually use as the parking brake. It's just a ball valve in the rear brake line, so we can lock the rear brakes and use it to swing it around and extra maneuverability. So anyway, and plus the air lockers, this is a truck, it's been a daily driver through a couple of winters here and gets driven regularly through those winters. And I guess a good example with this, we put new batteries in this truck, I think it was this summer, last winter, somewhere in there. In 2020, we had to put new batteries in the truck. Those batteries we'd put in 2011. And they're not that it matters, they were Optima yellow tops, but normally we slay batteries around our place because, the trucks, you wheel a truck and then it ends up sitting for, months, 6 weeks before we go around and mess with everything again. And that's the cool thing with this truck is we use it enough to where, we haven't even had problems with the batteries in it.
Cool.
And so the air lockers are nice for driving on the street. You guys deal with snow and ice. You know the deal. It's,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you're running, what size
nice
tires are you
having
running
them.
on that?
So those are 40s. We've had 40s on it most of its entire life. They're the 40-inch Nitto Trail Grapplers is what we're running now.
Nice.
And we've run the 40-inch Goodyear for a while. We've actually run a couple sets of 37s on it for a couple of trips. There's one trip that we only had sticky tires, and we didn't want to waste the sticky tires driving 1,500 miles each way for an ultimate adventure. So we actually have had a set of ex-militaries that actually have history. They were Pat Gramillion's old tires from one generation of his Bronco when he was running the Hummer wheels on his Bronco back in the Rat Pack days when, those guys were the rock crawling gods. And we ended up with a set of his tires, and we ran those for a road trip and towed a trailer with our stickies on it for the ultimate adventure. So most of the time it's had 40s. When we took it to Mexico, we put 37s on it. I think that's because that's what it was a sponsored trip, and that's what tire they had.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, it's had a little bit of variety, but it's built around 40s. That's where it works well with, and that's generally what it has.
Well, it's a beautiful truck. I think one of my favorite features of the truck, and I'm assuming this was a hand-built thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the bed kind of storage system that you have on the back of that truck seemed like it was super heavy duty, lightweight, yet really worked really well. It didn't get in the way. You weren't crunching because you've got kind of like this tube bed for it, but yet it's not a full it's still utilitarian. It reminded me of some of the things you see in Australia. Tell me about that bed you got on that truck.
Yeah, so that's kind of a second generation thing. We built a similar trail bed on my dad's crew cab we took that on the UA in 06 was the first one was 07. We took that truck and wheeling a crew cab, we knew we needed a tube bed of some sort. And so we kind of came up with that design, and it's not like brand new. There's, Toyota guys have been into that world for a long time, and, trail beds kind of they all kind of go the same direction because it's what works. And so there's some design cues there that we put on of our own, but we kind of took that experience and put it into this one. And one of my priorities was trying to keep it lightweight and keep everything usable, just the things you listed off. We, having lived out of that truck, for a couple of years, we knew what some different ideas of what we wanted, and ended up using, and this is one of the things that a lot of fabricators don't touch material thinner than 1/8 wall. And we actually bought some square tube for the bed floor that's all 14 gauge. You know, a lot of the material is lighter in places that it's not going to get hit, and it's worked out really well.
Makes
and,
sense.
You know, tried to dial back from some of the normal stuff, because part of where I came from, my dad had, he grew up on a refinery, was farmed for a while, worked in mines and, you know, big industrial stuff, setting big generators and turbines and hydroelectric plants, and everything tends to get really heavy. And going through the refineries and all the mining stuff that he had done, and, you know, working on hydroelectric plants, you know, you're used to a bunch of heavier material, and he's a partner in the business. And it's been a journey for us to step away from that. We've, you know, I ran a circle track car in high school and the first couple of years of college. And, you know, we learned a lot on that, you know, just to step back into looking at lightweight things. And we have tried to apply that into our trucks as making things durable, but still not ridiculously heavy. And that bed's a place where we applied some of that, you know, keeping it utilitarian and durable, but not overweight. So one of the things, and we're still improving on it. You know, the first year we took it, it didn't have the bin boxes in front of the tires under the bed deck. And, you know, we're storing everything on top of the bed. And so we put those in to fit the action packers that have most of the spare parts. And then, you know, we've added tie down points and, you know, figured out better ways to organize our gear every time we use it. The next big thing is going to be getting the darn fuel tank out of it, because we're pretty big fans of using a factory fuel tank. And in this case, it's a 40-gallon Suburban fuel tank that the easy place to fit it is it's right behind the cab in the front of the bed, and the batteries are right beside it. You know, so the whole package is tidy, and it's got a deck over it that lets us stack gear on top, and it packages in nice, but it's still a big chunk of bed space that we don't get to use. So we're looking at trying to get a fuel tank under the bed behind the axle so that we open that up and, you know, and free up a little bit more space. But well, and that's another detail, just to dive a little bit deeper on that one. Keith, you probably remember on the UA trip dealing with gas stops, and
oh yeah,
we did really good on this trip.
Well,
yeah, but there's still 26 rigs getting gas.
Yeah, and that was, I think I don't remember exactly which stop it was, but I remember I walked up, and you and I had only talked briefly. We were a couple days into the trip, and we ended up talking kind of extended there. I walked up and I said, "All right, man, you're running a 454, and are you just running on fumes?" And you're like, "Oh, I got this big tank in here," and, you know, I think you. What did you say you were getting for miles a gallon on that thing? 8-9 miles a gallon, something like that.
Oh. On the road, it's I think our composite for the trip was around 9. On the road, we run 10-ish. You pretty much plan on 10. Sometimes you push 11. I think we've been on some legs that have more spirited driving involved, that we've been down to around 9. But, you know, in general, you just move the decimal over and plan on 10.
That's impressive for that.
Yeah, for a truck that big.
Yeah,
and he's
that size tire. That's awesome.
You know, and also speaking of the fabrication of that custom bed that he did, as well as other components of the truck, he's being a little too humble. I tell you what, John, you really got to see. I just showed John, while you were speaking there, some pictures I had on my phone of your truck there,
that thing
Steven.
is awesome.
And the fabrication quality of this, I'm going to try to post some pictures online, or maybe Steven can eventually in one of our social medias, but it's just top notch. This is not some guy who has a welder and some plate steel that's just making something. This is it looks like it darn near came from the factory, even though you know it's an off-road rig. The quality of the fabrication of the parts, whether they are off-road design specific parts or custom parts specifically for this truck, it's 3 steps above anything I could hope to be at this point in my life. So,
Yeah, it's a very cool. Looks super well built. I like it.
It's just a beautiful truck. And then, John, I don't think it was lost on you that his truck's an MV4500 stick.
No, I love that. That makes me happy.
Yeah. I told him, I says, 96 and newer Chevys with the manual are not existent in Michigan. You just don't see them, as you've seen. And, so when I saw that he had a manual in this with a big block, it's like, oh man, look at this truck. This is awesome.
I love especially how you were saying you started with it and you used what you had. You started essentially stock and just beefed it up, and went from there. I love that. The whole concept in that.
Yeah, and that's where we got lucky, is finding kind of that utilitarian truck.
Yeah.
And we kind of stumbled into it. We kind of knew what we were looking for, and it happened to pop up. And the one that I kicked myself on is that same guy a couple of years later had the same 99 GMC, same Vortec 454 4500, but it was a crew cab. And he wanted a bunch more money for it, and it was worth a bunch more than what we paid for that single cab, and it just wasn't the right time and everything else. But it's like, man, you don't find that.
Yeah.
It would have been cool even if I just bought it and stored it. It would have been worth having.
Exactly.
But it is, it's a cool starting point, and the manual tranny is, everybody debates back and forth about it, but I can tell you, when you're in the middle of nowhere in Canada and, backcountry in Alaska, it's kind of comforting thinking that I really don't care if water gets in there because it's going to keep working.
Yeah.
Or, we can have massive electrical failures, and if we can make the engine run, the thing will move.
Yeah.
And there's ways that you can rig. We've looked at, what solenoids do you have to fire on a 4L80 to make it go into what gear? There's ways to make all that stuff work, but, there's still something about,
it's simple.
That if you can put it in gear, and I don't care if I have to weld the clutch plate to the flywheel, we can make the thing go,
See, this is
that
why
would be an interesting trail repair.
This is why I knew you and John
Right.
would get along, because when I found out you were a manual trans guy, and both John and I are hardcore manual trans guys, all my off-road rigs have always had manual transes in them. Everything
I currently own has a manual.
I've done 6 or 7 auto to manual conversions over the years. That's how we are. And as John and I spoke on the UA podcast that we did, all of the trans problems we had on this trip, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but I don't think there was any manual trans problems on this trip, were there?
No, nobody overheated their manual tranny.
Exactly.
Yep.
But how many automatics overheated? We have 4 or 5 of them, didn't we?
Yeah.
So
Well, they built them wrong.
Well, we may have had Ian doing it 4 or 5 times.
well, there was Ian doing poor Ian.
But yeah, he had a rough go with that one. But and that's the thing. Really the only thing I've seen go wrong with the manual tranny system for off-road use is they're harder to drive in really technical terrain. And there's no doubt about that. There's a reason why guys, when we raced King of the Hammers, we raced with an auto tranny. In our serious rock crawlers, we have autos, and they're full manual control autos, but they shift fast. You're only driving with 2 feet. You've got that torque converter cushion. There's a lot of cool features there, but in a general purpose camping, exploring, all around truck, it is comforting because that manual is going to work. And the only thing I've seen go wrong with them is, it's probably something you guys see way more than we do, but if you push in the clutch in the mud, in deep, soupy mud that's going to get in your bell housing, and you get that mud up in your clutch, you're dead in the water.
Ooh.
But
I never thought of that.
the fix is, I've seen that once. It was at a guy did it at Top Truck Challenge, and the cool thing about it though, the fix is you got to winch it out, get it out somehow, and then you wash it, and it's fixed. It's that tough.
Exactly.
I like it.
Pour water in there, and it's fixed.
So you do that with an automatic.
Well, as
Right.
as a bit of a side note here, and it kind of segues into maybe the next portion here a little bit as well. Yes, I've dealt with that myself. I had all of my early wheeling rigs when I first started wheeling in the late 90s, early 2000s were the Chevy S Series trucks, the S10s, the Blazers, things like that. I did get one packed with mud up in the Upper Peninsula on Mount Arvon years ago, and we had to tow it out. And that one, unfortunately, didn't have any way of accessing it, so we did have to pull the trans out, and we just did a clutch while we were there. So yes, I've dealt with what you're talking about. That is my only trail manual trans failure in 20 plus years of wheeling. So to me, that's a win. But something I need to mention, and I kind of need to go sideways here a little bit, kind of taking the storyline a little bit sideways. And I think I spoke to you briefly about this. What Steven didn't know until him and I met in person on UA is I had spoken to him years and years ago. I want to say it was like 15 plus years ago on the phone. I called you up, and I don't remember if you remember this conversation from UA, but I had called you up. And maybe I didn't fully explain myself in UA either, but I had called you up to buy some parts because I was doing a solid axle swap on a Chevy, actually a GMC Jimmy. And if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't offer a solid axle swap kit for the S-Series trucks, no?
Nope, all big stuff.
All big stuff, exactly. But when I called you up, you spoke to me on the phone, and I told you what I was trying to do. And I was, at the time, I was like this 23, 24-year-old broke kid that was putting a Dana 60 under a S10, and I was running into all sorts of little problems with like my steering and different things. And you sold me a couple of products, and you gave me this. We ended up talking on the phone, if I remember. Now, of course, we're talking probably, like I said, 15, maybe even 20 years ago. My memory's probably bad on that. But you talked to me on the phone for quite some lengthy time, longer than a typical business owner would, and said, hey, here's some tips that you can do to solid axle swap that thing. Try this, do this and this, and here's some steering stuff that'll work for you. And you led me down the right road to do my first successful solid axle swap. Now, I've done several since then, of course, but I've forever been eternally grateful for your knowledge there. And as a business owner, and I've been a business owner myself before, so taking that kind of time out of your day to talk to some wild-haired kid that doesn't really know jack from anything at the time and try to steer him in the right way as an enthusiast, I've always been grateful for that. I mean, and I knew talking to you way back then for just a few minutes on the phone that you were a hardcore enthusiast. And once again, I want to thank you for that, because that was really cool for you to do that all those years ago, because you could have dismissed me so easily and said, all right, well, I can sell you this and this and have a good day. But no, you gave me a bunch of technical advice and gave me some ideas. I think, I could be wrong, I think you were the one that told me about using 52-inch rear Chevy springs for the front, a couple of things like that. And you had given me all this great knowledge, and it put me down the road to be able to be successful in that build that I was doing. And I that was really cool of you, man.
Well, and I found all kinds of seeds that we've planted that have grown up into these awesome trees lately. Stories like that. And when you do this, it is easy to just talk about this stuff. They say if you enjoy your work, you never go to work. And I can tell you there's times that what we do really is work, because I have this theory that if you get paid for it, you're going to have to work. But,
well, yeah.
We're still, let's face it, I could have a real job. I go to work, I talk about four-wheeling, we build cool truck parts, we figure out how to make cool truck parts better. Lately we figure out where we can try to find some pieces to build some of our truck parts, that kind of stuff. But that's something we know that every person is just a person. They want to go four-wheeling, and they got to figure stuff out too. And and this is the kind of thing you can't be an ass to somebody and not expect it to come back at you. That doesn't work. I have people and I have businesses that I won't associate with now because of things that they did, and you don't want to play that game. pay it forward and help people out, and this is what you get. I ran into a kid, dude's got to be 35, but I was down in Moab this last weekend, and he chased me down in the campground I was staying in, and said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember, but I stopped by your shop years ago when you were at the old shop up on the hill, which was 20 years ago, 15 years ago plus. And, I had to borrow a wrench because I broke my Jeep up on the hill behind your shop. And, you guys showed me around, and I saw your machines, and I came back and watched some of the stuff run, and, did some work with this other guy at this other machine shop. And, that really set me on the path. I ended up going to engineering school and got an ME, and then did these trade schools, and, and I'm restoring cars now. And, all that stuff was really cool and really helped me out. I'm like, holy cow, I'm that guy now. I still think I'm on the other side of that sometimes. And then somebody alerts me to the fact that it's not always that way. But, and I had some really cool people that helped me out. And, a couple of them that are still in the industry. I mentioned Pat Vermillion before. Growing up here in Carbondale, he moved here in the early 90s, and was an icon in the four-wheel drive industry. It was maybe a little before your guys' time in the magazine, but man, he was.
I've heard the name
all over magazines. Yeah, Premier Power Welder and Pull Pal was their deal, and
yes,
he was semi-retired when he started those businesses and traveled all over the country four-wheeling. Had multiple cover shots on, multiple titles, and lived in Carbondale. And when I started four-wheeling more, hanging out on the trails with him, and, he kind of gave me some pointers, and, we ended up on some cool trail rides with some cool industry people, and, kind of helped push me along there. And then another guy that had a local four-wheel drive shop, a guy named Chris Overacker, started Mountain Off-Road Enterprises, which is still going under, I think, the third owner now. That business has had three different guys, all good guys run it. It's been a great business the whole time, and he started it and was building shackle reversal kits for Jeeps and, doing all kinds of cool stuff when YJs were the thing. And, he actually hired me to weld up brackets for him when he needed it early on, and kind of put me under his wing, invited me to a photo shoot that he was doing with with a magazine guy down in Grand Junction on one of Chris's products. And I ended up hitting it off with Ed Fortson at Peterson's Four-Wheel and Off-Road. And that really helped launch my business. And so I guess I've got some really good examples of people that helped me, and I don't mind paying it forward. And as you can probably tell, I can talk about some of this stuff for a long time, and it's really something I do have to be careful of on the phone, especially lately, because
it's so appreciated though. Not only being on the podcast, I mean, you're being genuine here, and we're just fascinated listening to you.
Absolutely.
But at the same point, like I said, and actually, my memory was jogged. Even you had actually talked to me twice on the phone, because the first time I had called you up, and I had said, because I had a local, when you mentioned you had businesses you don't deal with anymore, there was a local business here. They're actually still in business, but they were an off-road shop. And like I said, I was this young kid, and I went in and I said, I want to do this solid axle swap on this S10 that I own, or this Jimia that I own. And they essentially laughed me out the door, and they told me that there was no way I could do that. I just needed to buy some lift kit out of a catalog that they had there. And I said, no, I don't want the IFS. I said, I want, I said, I already have this Dana 60 79 Ford Dana 60 axle. I want to put it in front of it. I said, I can weld, I can fabricate. I said, but I'm still learning. And they basically told me, it'll just be a project that's going to go to the junkyard. You're going to cut out the IFS and you'll never finish it. And that's basically what they told me. This local off-road shop. Well, that's when I started kind of early days of the internet, and I called you up. And I don't know why. Somebody had said something about some solid swaps or something, and I called you, and you said you didn't have one for the S10, but then you gave me a bunch of ideas. And then when I got the axle slung under it with some 52-inch springs and all this and that, I ran into some issues where my steering my geometry wasn't quite correct, and I called you back up, and that's when I ended up giving you a credit card, because it wasn't even that first call. That first call, you got no sale out of me, but that second call, you got, not big money, but maybe a couple $100 in parts. And I said, okay, cool, I need this and this and this. And then I also needed some axle parts for the Dana 60 that I was rebuilding, and I believe you sold me those, if I remember correctly. So I got all these parts that I needed from you, specifically because you had helped me the first time. And then, like I said, this put me down the trail. That was my first serious wheeling rig. Prior to that, I was wheeling just, $40 junkyard junkers. And then I got into this, solid axle Jimmy with an MV 4500 swap, and it just went downhill from there. Now I'm into Land Cruisers and Samurais and all sorts of other things. And now John and I founded an off-road museum, for God's sake. I mean, it's just, so we actually have you to thank a little bit for this, because I kind of introduced John to the off-road world a little bit.
Oh, the whole thing.
And so if
I could drive a stick before that, though.
If I would have put my tail between my legs when that off-road shop laughed me out of the door, and I went out and I just would have done nothing. And if I would have called you and maybe a couple other people and nobody wanted to help me with that, and I would have just lost faith in the idea of being able to build a
You'd
solid
probably be
axle.
driving a Prius right now.
Yeah, who knows, man. But talking to this guy on the phone who was like, no, man, you can totally do this, and here's some ideas. And I was able to build that Jimmy. And here we are now, years later. We've done a UA together. We finally met each other in person, and now we're talking to him on the podcast, which was created, as I told him before, for the Museum of Off-Road Adventure. Yeah. This whole thing, I mean, your influence, the butterfly effect in the off-road world, is huge. It really is, sir.
Well, and that's something I've seen come back in multiple ways, and the thing we try to keep in mind is, sooner or later we're going to end up on the trail with a lot of the people that we deal with. And that's the way that we like to look at it is, when we end up on the trail and when it starts getting dark and it's time to start heading back, and, we're recovering rigs, and, this is not a person you want pissed off at you.
No, not for sure. No.
So so you take care of that and, and help people out. It's,
So
I think some of it's a product of the environment. It's these rigs. We started four-wheeling to get into the outdoors is where a lot of it went, and it separated into a bit of sport use from there, especially lately. There's a lot of sport use, but the base of this is outdoors people using vehicles as transportation to get into the outdoors, and you're not going to survive long in the outdoors by yourself.
Generally, no.
Contrary to what anybody thinks, when you're up to the private parts in Snowbank and need some help getting out, you and your shovel are going to be pretty happy to see somebody else.
Yeah, someone that hates cold weather. That sounds terrible.
Yeah, and that's real.
It is.
So
I like cold weather and snow, but
everything else.
That doesn't sound good.
Well, all right. So, Steve, I got to say here, our listeners have been listening for a while, us talking about the Z71 Chevy, and we did kind of promise them episode 71 we were going to do this. Let me ask you this, circling back to the old Z71. So why? Okay, I'm just going to I'm going to just throw it in your game, your side of the court for a minute here. Your ball court. Yeah, that's the right word for it. Why did you not start? And I know the answer here, but I want to hear it out your words, because I like the way you describe things. Why did you not start with a Z71 to build your UA rig or other Chevy trucks that you would build?
I guess because the sticker doesn't really do a lot for you.
Oh, really?
I think we're all on the same page here. That's a pretty lightweight package. And I remember, you guys are going to come up with some of the facts a little bit better on this when it came out, but I don't remember ever being impressed. And I've talked about this before. I know when the TJ came out, and I'm not a Jeep guy, but that was a game changer in the off-road world.
John's over there going, yes.
The Rubicon package, yes. I know when the Rubicon package came out, because that was a game changer in the off-road world. Those are things, those packages, that's stuff that was significant. And, the Z71 package, I know it started popping up in the mid 90s, but it was a sticker and some shocks, is what I remember it being. It really hasn't, it hasn't gone anywhere for GM, but that we've seen at least in the more hardcore off-road world. And, it's definitely not going to be any sort of a branch off into a Raptor fighter at all. So,
well,
when did they come out with that?
Well, here's what we've found out so far. So, my research and John's research. I guess let's start. John, what did you have from your research on the Z71?
Not much.
You got nothing, huh?
Trying to look it up. There's not a lot of specific results. It links you back to pages on how to build your Z71. It's really difficult to find anything at all.
This is a mystery that we had uncovered a while ago, mainly because my boy had been given a 2008 Z71 that had been totaled by my brother, and we rebuilt it with some junkyard parts, and that's his daily driver now. And when I was in high school, the Z71 package was popular, and I had a couple of friends that's what they wanted. That was their dream truck. They wanted like a black Z71, but I never really fully understood what the difference was in a Z71 versus a regular truck. So I decided, as an automotive historian and someone who, I'm the executive director of an off-road museum, I found it strange that I didn't know the history of the Z71. So I just started to dig into it, and I opened up, in my mind, an automotive mystery, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of information out there about it. I even got to the point where I called the GM Tech Center and got a hold of their historical department and spoke to a lady over there and said, okay, we know that Z71 started as an RPO code, regular production option code, and there's evidence that it was used all the way back in 1985 in a square body Chevy. But that vehicle, the only thing about that vehicle is it had the GovLock rear differential, which is typically RPO code G80. So the Z71 didn't mean anything else on that truck. In 1992, the Z71 was sticker package, and that's all it was started to be offered to the dealerships to install the dealership, and then it became a factory thing in 1994. That's all I know at this point. And John doesn't have anything else either on it. And I was hoping that, speaking to you, Mr. Square Body Chevy guy, that you could tell me what the heck Z71 meant in the square bodies, at least in 1985. So what do you know about the Z71, Steven? At least the start.
Now I know a lot more. I'm kind of the same thing, just like you're saying. You hear people refer to it, they, in the same way that guys drive, I'm sitting in a Duramax truck, my dad drives a Power Stroke truck. I got, a buddy with a Cummins truck. You come up with these badges for the truck that's not really, anything related to the model. And same thing, you hear people call, I drive a Z71. And that's pretty easy, because a lot of times it says Z71 with a big red sticker on the side of it. But, beyond that, like I say, years ago, I blew that off, and I've kind of checked in with it over the years to see if it's really gone anywhere. And it really hasn't. It's generally maybe an extra skid plate and a set of slightly upgraded shocks. And that seems to be about it. And in our world, that I guess I can see some uses for, a nicer shock is always nice. If you're actually traveling in the backcountry, a more durable shock is going to be a better thing. But it's never been something that gives you a selectable locker. It's not the TRD package in the Toyota. We know what that is. And,
Yes.
you get a selectable locker. That's part of the deal.
The Rubicon and the Jeep.
Yeah. These are things that give you tangible things that will help you get farther down the trail. And it doesn't feel like the Z71 ever got that. Maybe the AT4, I think now is maybe a slightly stepped up equivalent. And I'm kind of anxious to see now that the Ram TRX is out if GM will actually come up with something that will try to compete with the Raptor and the TRX on any level, or if they think that their ZR2 Colorado is that truck. But like I say, they just don't have an off-road package that really makes people say, "Wow, that's what I want." I see Jeep Rubicons driving up and down the road all the time, and I guarantee half those people don't know what a locker does. But they got the package.
So maybe they just thought that Z71 sounded cooler than instead of putting G80 on the side of the truck.
It could be. In those earlier trucks, maybe that was it. I don't know anything about that RPO showing up any earlier than in those 88 up trucks.
Yeah.
That's where I remember seeing it. And, and part of it is I was born in 73 and I'd started driving my Blazer. My parents bought a 74 Blazer when we moved to Colorado in 77 and had that for a couple of years, and then ended up with the 82 that I still have in 83. And I started driving it in 89. So, other than looking back at all of the trucks that we've cycled through over the years, I don't remember seeing a Z71 code in any of them. And obviously it never made a splash because it's not a thing anybody knows about.
You're right, and that's basically what we came down to. So, our listeners here, if you were hoping to find a Z71 heavy episode, this is not it yet. Hopefully someday we can figure it out, but we found that Z71 has meant different things throughout the years. Like Steven said, it's been a skid plate, shocks, stickers, and and the other thing is I even thought that it always meant you got the G80 GovLock rear locking differential, and apparently that's not the case. There are Z71s that do not have G80 rear ends. So, I think
it seems like if there was going to be anything off-roady, that's the first place to go.
Exactly. Even though it's not a great locker, it's something.
But hey, man, those stickers add so much extra torque and horsepower.
Oh yeah, there you go. So I guess we're going to have to shelf this one. We're going to have to, at least that's what I think, John, until we can get more research and definitively get someone to say, because that's where I want to, maybe that's where I want to start. Is when did RPO code Z71 come out and what did it mean?
Yeah,
like what did it mean? Is it earlier than 85? The only one I've ever found, like I said, there was an 85 square body where it was. I had a picture of inside of a glove box. It had the RPO code, and the owner of that truck had no idea why it said Z71. There was no extra tow hooks. There was no skid plates. Nothing that we could figure out.
Yeah.
So, I guess the Z71 out there. If there's somebody out there in the off-road world that says, man, I know everything there is to be about Z71 and how it changed over the years, get a hold of us. We'd love to talk to you.
For sure.
But speaking of talking to people here, one thing we have failed to do in this episode, John, and I know you're looking at me all confused here.
Yes.
Is Stephen Watson and I, we've been talking trucks, and he's been talking all this great stuff, but he really hasn't been pushing his own products or anything like that. But I'm thinking of something right here, off the top of my head. We had talked before about doing episode 73 as our square body Chevy episode because that's the year the square body Chevy came out on our play on numbers thing that we do. I think, Mr. Watson, if you are interested, we would love to have you back in 2 episodes to talk more about off-road design and what you do there, not only for the square bodies, but for all of your product lines. We want to hear more about what off-road design does. We need more time with you to talk about your product line, the history of off-road design, and a little bit about the square body Chevys. Would you be game for something like that?
Yeah, that's as I maybe mentioned there before, the thing that got me started was a couple of squares. So I'm down with that.
Sweet.
Let's totally do that. We need to do that. And so listeners out there, if you want to hear more about off-road design, and we need to talk about his doublers and his transfer case options and all the other stuff that he does as well. So you need to tune back in 2 weeks to listen to episode 73, because we're going to get him back on here, because this guy, I'm having fun talking to Steve.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to it already.
So let's do that. John, before we let him go here on episode 71, is there any other final questions you have for him until we talk to him again?
No, I'll try and get a couple together for the next one. How about that?
All right, we can do that.
You're going to let me do my thing?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes.
come on,
He's
man.
doing his thing. John normally signs us out
I
here.
don't even know if I want to do it now.
All right. All right.
Oh, don't.
Get your stick together.
John, all right. So, Steven, it's been great talking to you. We're going to talk to you again here on episode 73. And, John, actually, before we do that, before we let Steven go, because John's going to tell people where they can find us on social media and where they can find out about the Museum of Off-Road Adventure. But more importantly, off-road design. Steven, please tell us what are the best ways to get a hold of you for all of your products and to check out what you do.
Yes, it's pretty easy. Website is offroaddesign.com, and socials, it's at Offroad Design, Facebook and on the gram. We got messaging there. We've got contact us email off the website. Our phone number is pretty easy. It's 970, which is Western Colorado, 945-7777.
Nice.
There's, of course, a story behind how I got that phone number. But anyway, those are the ways, and pretty much anything slightly older full-size truck related, using a full-size hard off-road, we either do it or we're going to figure it out.
Awesome.
Well, we're going to talk to you again here very shortly. John, why don't you let everybody know where else to find us?
Sounds good. Well, first off, an official thank you to Mr. Stephen Watson of Off-Road Design for joining us for today's episode. Also, a huge thank you to Mr. Andrew, our producer. Without him, absolutely none of this would be possible, and we wouldn't have to subject everybody to listening to us all the time, so they'd probably like that better. That being said, if you want to know more about our what we do, go on facebook.com/groups/4x4 Talk. Wow, I'm getting them all wrong today, aren't I?
That's all right.
Or just search 4x4 Talk on Facebook. You'll get access to actually interact with us and all the other listeners of the show. Make sure to check us out, patreon.com/wheelinradio. Access those $2 a month. You'll get to listen to The End of the Trail, which is our bonus after show. A lot of extra content and all kinds of good stuff there. I think that's all I got.
Museum of Off-Road Adventure on Facebook and Instagram, but we're most active on Facebook, so check us out there. But
so with that being said, thanks for listening and have a good one, everybody.